Good evening and welcome to the Grace Talk. I am Gloria Godson. Thank you for joining us. A lot has changed in America in 2020, and much of it is not good. Many of the freedoms and rights that we have historically enjoyed as Americans have been severely eroded. And many of us are left wondering, is this America? The question for our discussion today is, how do you go to sleep in America and wake up in China? Because a lot of what we see and what we've come to experience, and unfortunately, what we've come to accept in America is so reminiscent of what happens in nations that are not free. My guests for this powerful conversation today are John Riddell, Chairman of Faith and Freedom Coalition, Delaware, and Rich Higgins. Rich has written a book that I have heard a lot about, The Memo, and it appears that he has predicted a lot of what is going on today in America. He saw that a long way off. So if you're listening to us today, Rich is the right man to answer your questions about the deep state, who they are, and what their plans for America is going forward. John and Rich, welcome to the Grace Talk.
Glad to be here.
Thanks, Gloria. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. John, I will turn it over to you. What do you do when you go to sleep in America and wake up in China?
Well, I have to say, I met with Rich, I think it was in March or April, I can't remember which of this year, and heard him speak. I heard him speak on a show first, on a Zoom call, and then asked to meet with him privately with somebody down from North Carolina. And when he laid out what he had seen and what was coming, it sort of made my head spin. And I thought I was pretty well involved in this. And I watched it unfold over the next several months, exactly what he was saying. It truly amazed me. And I think people need to understand that Rich Higgins was the first one, maybe not the first one, but he was one in 2017 who saw the coup coming against the president, wrote about it, courageously presented it to the president's, I think his son, you could send it to, Rich, to get it to the president. And Rich was called into a meeting with the president, a prolonged meeting where Rich explained exactly what was happening and what the president could be expect coming his way. Unfortunately, Rich, if I get this story wrong, just tell me. And then I'm going to keep quiet. We want to have Rich talk the rest of the time because he's the one that's most interesting. The president had a meeting with McMaster's, who was Rich's boss. And the president told McMaster's, oh, look what Rich Higgins and his team discovered. We got to look into this. It turns out McMaster's was one of the bad actors. So Rich and his team got booted from the government, and Rich went on a crusade to defend the president, defend democracy, defend liberty, and more importantly, to defend the country against the Chinese invasion that's coming in many different ways. So with that, Gloria, I'll turn it back to you and Rich.
So Rich, is back to you. I am glued and looking, at you to hear what it is that you have to tell us today, because you do have a lot of experience in this background, and also you've written on this. And from John's description just a minute ago, you have also been a speaker, a very notable speaker on this issue. So talk to us about the deep state. Talk to us about what is going on in America today. Our audience wants to know.
Well, I think any understanding of what's happening in the United States today requires people to have a deep understanding of history. And one of the things that is most noticeable today in the sort of the degraded state of our education is the lack of emphasis on history, right? I was lucky. I had a classic Western civilization, Western education. So you learned basic principles of Rome and Greece and so on and so forth. And, not only ancient history, but also some modern history. And I think, most Americans would be shocked to know that we're 100 years into this long program to subvert, the American political founding. And, that the basis of that American political founding, that, man is created in the image of God, that it's God that provides us rights. We see now that is under attack with this concept of privileges. Whereas rights are bestowed upon you by God, they can't be taken away. Privileges bestowed upon you by the state can be removed. And so I think it's this 100-year campaign that we're now seeing carried forward, first and foremost by China in terms of a nation state. But so much of what we see happening in America today comes to us from other Americans. These other Americans who subscribe to these foreign ideologies, many of them evil at their essence, and they're fueled by greed primarily, and the greed and the opportunistic nature of several of the people on Wall Street that back the Chinese Communist Party instead of their fellow Americans. It's really a tragic period to be alive and to see, these Americans doing this to us. That's the thing I take away from 2020 more than anything else. It's not that, the Chinese would do this, or the Chinese Communist Party is bad, or that, communist subversion has been taking place for 100 years. It's the willing participation of Americans against other Americans in it.
Thank you, Rich. That is a sobering place to start. What I heard from you is that this is not happenstance. This did not just come upon us. It is a strategically planned and executed effort over 100 years. You said it's been 100 years campaign to really take away and change, this nation from what it was, and eviscerate the rights and privilege and freedoms that we have as Americans. And then the complicity of Americans in this plot, the complicity of Americans with foreign nations to destabilize and to take away the rights and freedoms that we enjoy, because you said because of greed, primarily greed, and that they've come, got into bed with these other nations. Can you dive a little deeper? Who are we talking about here?
If you scratch the surface, you don't have to look too far to see. Earlier this evening I was talking with John, and he was talking about how he's recently been banned from a social media platform for espousing Christian views about liberty. He was banned on a social media platform. So you see the big tech oligarchs, you see the mainstream media, which is a 24/7 propaganda machine. You see corporations who want either cheap labor, cheap manufacturing costs in China. And then you see the banks as well. And this is where the banks get interesting, is because what's happening at an international level is many of the well-to-do financial interests globally are investing in China as a future model for governance. And they've set about on a project known as One Belt, One Road, OBOR for short. And it is nothing less than the reconstitution of the Silk Road, right, from history, right? And the Silk Road is the unification of the Eurasian landmass under one huge economic market. Well, part and parcel of that was always the quote unquote, and you would hear it during the Obama administration, a little bit during the George W. Bush administration, which was the managed decline of America. And so the American people said, no, we don't want to go along with this. We're gonna, we think he's a little bit brusque and maybe a little bit loud, and he's a little New York, but we're gonna vote for this guy, Donald J. Trump, because he's not with the plan. And after voting for him, managed decline became just a decline. And so what we saw was a series of actions, perpetrated by our own security services in league with our quote unquote allied security services. Then we saw the Senate weaponized against the president. Then we saw the special counsel's office. Then we saw the impeachment. And now here we are with ElectionGate. And I'll talk briefly about the election because I think it's the most current, we're living through it right now. We saw the riots and everything taking place this summer. They were all part of the same operation to remove the president, right? And rolling into the election, we saw China and we saw Venezuela and other communist countries moving inside our election infrastructure, particularly these electronic voting machines. We've known for more than 16 years that Venezuelan intelligence services have had an interest in electronic voting. Yet we went into this, again, unprepared, our intelligence community too busy fighting Donald Trump. And here we have an incident now, I believe, on the scale of another 9/11, where the entire country, the entire world knows that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. And we're now, forced with this conundrum. Do we accept this lie, or do we rise up against him? I mean, it's a terrible position to put the country in, where it's in conflict with itself. And all of this is part of that same strategic design.
Wow. Okay. The media, the work of the media is unfortunately well known, and John is not the only one who has been banned. So many have been banned. The managed decline of America. Now, and the reason for this, in your mind, is the greed of Americans who want money, who want cheap labor. So how can we resolve this? What I'm hearing from you is that this is ongoing, and is there an exit strategy here? Is there something that we can do to stop this snowball?
Realistically, I think that we're in the position where we really need to have I don't even know what you'd call it. It's an awakening of sorts, but it's also a kind of an acceptance of the fact that we're going to have to take some drastic actions, right? I mean, anything that we think is going to solve itself through sort of the normal political posturing of the two-party system is doomed to failure. We need to be thinking beyond the traditional political solution set. Is that a new party? Is it is it a formalization of the MAGA movement in the nationalist populist sense of the word with a Christian ethos? Is it the internationalization of a movement like that? So these, I don't have the answer to these questions, but these are the things that the leaders of the Christian churches, the MAGA movement, the populists, the nationalists all need to be thinking about.
That was going to be my question. Obviously, where would these discussions take place, and who should spearhead them? And what is the time frame that we're talking about here?
Well, John, I mean, I don't know. Do you want to throw in some thoughts on that?
Yeah, Rich, when I met with Rich like I said, in April this year, he said there needed to be a new populist movement. But the secret to it, he said, is it must be faith-led. Because if it's not faith-led, if it's not centered on Christ, if it's not centered on our Christian roots, then any populist movement could swing left or right to the extremes. It has to be guided by the Word of God. And so what we did was we formed a movement. It's not an organization, because we don't want to create another organization. There's plenty of organizations out there that can do this, but you have to sort of go in the right direction. I mean, you're moving towards to the mission. The mission should be accomplished. So we formed a movement called Serve God, Defend Liberty Movement. And we approached a couple of Catholic bishops, some really the biggest Catholic bloggers, some of the Protestants, pastors who also have a voice that can reach beyond, the norm. And in January, we're going to have a Zoom call with Rich so they can understand exactly what's at stake here, what needs to be done, and how the church needs to stand up. And that's the key. If the church does not stand up, then we're wasting our time, because we could very well move. If Rich is correct, and he's the one leading all this information. This is not anything that I'm saying like I've created this. I've not. He's created all of this through his. He told me the president was surrounded on all four sides with the CIA, the FBI, the Defense Department. They were coming after him, and and when I saw it unfolding, I thought, oh my God, look what's happening. So unless America wakes up, and I mean the church wakes up, because the first thing they do with any communist movement is to take down the cross, and they've done that. They shut our churches down for Easter. They shut our churches down for Christmas. When is somebody going to wake up and say, look, Pat and I had COVID-19, all right? We were really sick, but they are using this COVID thing to shut down the United States with the exact backwards way to do this. Pat and I didn't get saved by medicine from the hospitals or from doctors. We got saved from medicine from the frontline doctors from Florida, from California, because we worked with them and the black pastors. They called and told us, you do this, you do that, you do this, and we did that, and we survived. This COVID is not a death sentence. It's like, so they're trying to use that, weaponize that, like they're trying to, what they've done is take the sacraments of the church, marriage, life, and they politicize them and then weaponize them against Christians. So, what we have to do is with Rich's leadership and leadership of people like him, and Rich, please give them your website so they can go to there and see all these things, get all this information. Come together on the leadership like with Rich and his group. Otherwise, we're just flying blind. And wake up the religious community to start standing up and fighting. That's what took communism down in Poland. The church led it with solidarity, and that's why it was a faith-based. So that's the example of what you can do with a faith-based populist movement.
Thank you, and Rich, I'm going to ask you to give us your website in a minute. So what John is saying is that the lead for this has to come, the leadership has to come from the church to stand up and mobilize membership, mobilize Christians across the nation to speak up on this issue. Rich, go ahead and give us your website, and then we have some questions from our audience.
Well, the website is Unconstrained Analytics.org, all in one word, www.unconstrainedanalytics.org. And on there, you'll find everything from what to do to plan for violence in your neighborhood to, a free book, 300 pages long, that will walk you through the entire history of the emergence of communism, and communism in particular in the United States. The purpose of the website and that nonprofit organization really are a labor of love, right? We wrote that and we write those things because Steve Coughlin, my partner, and I in the 501c3, we write those things because we've learned over the years that within the government institutions, I mean, Steve and I both worked inside the intelligence community at very, very senior levels in the Pentagon, and being politically correct and political correctness is a weapon, and it is a very constraining weapon that limits, limits your ability to participate in reality. And so, what we wanted to do is we wanted to create an environment. We had to go to a C3 to do it, where we could write about what we knew to be factual, even when the government institutions themselves wouldn't accept what we were telling them.
Thank you, Rich. Let's touch base with our audience and get some questions. Hi, Daryl. Daryl says, blessing all. We honor you, woman of God, and your guests. Thank you, Daryl. And Mike Ancona says, we have been under attack from Marxists since the Soviet Revolution in 1917. Over the last 100 years, they have infiltrated every aspect of society, but especially the education system. Rich, is that correct?
Your audience is 100% correct. And it's not limited to the public school system. Okay, it's the public school system is perhaps farther along in their devolution, but what we've seen is, going back to, people don't realize, but like John Dewey from the Dewey Decimal System, a vowed Marxist, right? I mean, what we see is, I'm not saying every teacher, is a Marxist, but what's happened is because of the control of the narratives and because of the control of the content that education is allowed to provide, we've seen this. They removed the Bible from the public school circa 1950, 1951. It's been replaced by this sort of postmodernism. And today, if you take a 6-year-old Christian child raised in a Christian home and put them into an American public school at 17 years old, you will get back a Marxist. If not in practice, at least in terms of their ideological structure, right? And we see that now where you're asking children to report on their parents and what they did for Thanksgiving. I mean, that's right out of Pol Pot, right? I mean, it's truly remarkable how far we've fallen.
Thank you. I would get another question from our audience. Daryl says, how would you compare Americans in levels of complicity with China and the president and his former staffers with Putin and Russia?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but I think Putin has his own concerns about China, right? Putin has a border, a huge border with this country, with literally an endless supply of manpower, a growing economic power, and there's Russia with an economy the size of Italy, and most of its mineral and just general geopolitical wealth, if you will, is located in its Far East. So I'm sure they're very concerned about the rise of China in and of itself. I see the Obama administration and I see the Trump administration. These administrations themselves are, they are hit or miss in terms of. I don't think that the Trump administration has been as effective as it could have been in terms of rooting this out, in large part because I think they underestimated the depth of the subversion, right? I think President Trump knew he had to drain the swamp. He didn't think it was 100 feet deep, and I think he's as he's worked his way through this, he's going, wow, the generals are subverted. And what I've told John in the past is, if you told somebody in 1965 America that in 2020 America you would have a Marxist running the CIA, Marxist at the leadership level inside of the FBI. These were the citadels of the West, right? The Pentagon, the citadels of the West. And today they can't even say Merry Christmas. It really is just remarkable.
Thank you, Rich. Another question for you from Daryl. He says, if Republican Secretary of States, Republican governors, federal Republican judges, Attorney General Barr, the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, the Supreme Court, all find no mass fraud in this election, how can it be said that the election is illegitimate? Are they all part of the deep state, or do they see the election as fair and reflecting the will of the people?
Well, I think there's two things. There's two answers I have to give on that. First off is we need to remember that President Trump and the MAGA movement was never Republican. Right? This is a huge misunderstanding that people have about President Trump. He is not a Republican. He leveraged the Republican infrastructure, but he was always a nationalist populist. And so the Republican establishment, which exists as part of the normal political power structure of Washington, always saw him as an abomination, a threat, and wants to see him gone. I mean, make no mistake about it. Their donor class is the same donor class that supports the Democrats. And and this is where you hear the term uniparty comes in. Make no mistake about it. During the impeachment, when Nancy Pelosi brought forward that unlawful impeachment, I have no question Mitch McConnell was 100% on board with her doing that. No question about it. Now, I think in terms of going forward, do these different organizations have a stake in the election fraud? What I would say is this: they never expected the level of support for Trump to come out like it did, and it's exactly what happened in 2016. Now, what I know for a fact is that Venezuelan intelligence built out a system through a company called Smartmatic to keep Chavez in power. That company, Smartmatic, bought its way into the United States market in 2005 through a company called Sequoia. But they were discovered by the US security system through a process called CFIUS and kicked out. What most people don't know is that they were together, Sequoia and Smartmatic were one company for 2 years. So the softwares and other technologies populated into the United States. When Venezuela was kicked out, they circled around us and created what's called in the intelligence world, a front company called SVS Holdings. And SVS Holdings was used to reacquire Sequoia. SVS Holdings was then used to acquire ES&S. It was used to acquire Dominion. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. They built out this infrastructure over a period of almost a decade. And in 2019, the Chinese and the Bank of China came in through HSBC Bank in Canada and bought, well, basically loaned $150 million in exchange for collateralized patents on their technology, Dominion. So we had an election infrastructure that was owned, in fact, by the Bank of China, okay, that had been built and put in place by the communist regime in Venezuela. Now that's not negotiable. Did the Republicans know this? I doubt it. The intelligence community has been too busy the past 4 years fighting President Trump to do their job.
Thank you, Rich. We have more questions. Vivian, hi Vivian. She says, are you really saying that they shut the church down in March and Easter due to communism?
Yes. I mean, what the communists learned in Poland was, if you take down the cross, you take down the hope. And so they immediately went and took all the crosses off the churches. What did they do in China with the assistance of the Pope? And I'm Catholic, so they say that pains me. The Pope turned the bishops over to the communist government, appointing the bishops of the church. And right now, their crosses are coming down. And inside the churches is, you must, to be a member of the church, you must accept the Communist Manifesto. You must accept communism, period. Maoism, complete. And so in the United States, they knew right well they could not do a full frontal attack and say to everybody, you can't go to church. So they used the coronavirus and say, oh, it's, look, whatever happened to the 15 days to slow the spread? But they used that to shut the church down. And the church was pretty much shut down all the way through the summer. And I was in church today. You know how many people were in church? About 40 people were in church this morning. And so what they've effectively done is made a lot of these Christians what I call Sunday couch Christians, with their cup of coffee, watching their service on television, drinking their coffee, eating their donut, and think they're still going to mass and giving honor, or to services and giving honor to God. They are not. They have effectively put a wedge in the church right now. And there's a lot of bishops, there's a lot of Catholic bishops, there's a lot of Protestant pastors who are going along with this. I mean, and right now, if we don't do something, one of the things we called for was two things. We called for everybody to go to church in mass, period. You go to jail, go to jail. Don't go to church in mass. And that didn't happen. We asked people to start, we asked store owners to start opening their stores, and all these groups that are, and they had some great things like the Jericho March, marching around capitals and praying. If all those Christians would go to those stores that opened, what is the government going to do? Arrest everybody? But we stayed silent. So the church has really been silenced in many ways. And I can count on one hand the amount of bishops and the American Catholic bishops that are speaking out publicly and trying to defend this. So yes, they have pretty much taken the first giant step to silencing the church, and we're going along like wimps. I mean, I would want none of these people in the foxhole with me in Vietnam. None of them. You know what I mean? I didn't ask anybody who next to me what their faith was, or what their denomination was, or what's the color of their skin. And a foxhole, that doesn't matter. In combat, that doesn't matter. And Rich said this, and it's a military term. We are decisively engaged. At least the enemy is. We're not. And unless we get decisively engaged as a church, as a people, then we're going to lose this. We're going to lose this country. And to Daryl's question, yes, there is. If you look at why the Supreme Court did not take the Texas case, because John Roberts was screaming in there, if we take this case, we'll cause riots in the street. Are we ready for that? He made it a political decision rather than a judicial decision. We're in serious trouble here.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. We have more questions. Let's keep going here. Mike has, I don't know if it's a question or comment, but let's see. The difference between Poland and America is that Poland was turned over to communism in 1945 after World War II. They have always resisted the subjugation because it was in your face from the onset. America, on the other hand, was a slow and steady process, like the analogy of the frog in the pan of water. The Polish frog was put into hot water and wanted out immediately. The American frog was put in a pot of cold water and the heat was turned up slowly. The American frog finally realizes it is being cooked. Hopefully not too late. Any comment there, Rachel? You're shaking your head.
I think that's exactly what's going on, and I'm afraid that getting out of the pot easily is probably not going to happen. I want to answer one thing that John said is it's not just that about communism and closing the churches. It's not just that they closed the churches. That's okay. They closed the churches, and people say, well, that must be because of COVID. Well, when you close the churches, but you leave open the sporting goods store, Walmart, McDonald's, do I need to keep going Home Depot, right? The big box stores are just fine, right? It goes to show that there's a specific subtle, but really not so subtle, targeting to what they're closing and why. And, I think a lot of Americans, candidly, I think a lot of Americans are just struck by the horror of it. You accept the reality that their fellow Americans are willing to do this to them is a hard thing for people to grasp and embrace the horror and understand it, because until you do, you're going to stay in the pot.
Thank you. Let's keep going. We have more questions. Daryl says, it is one of the most honest things I have heard said that President Trump is not a Republican. I don't believe Republicans see it that way. So that's a comment that he made. We'll continue. Mike says the Republican Party leadership are perfectly happy with a Biden presidency. The Washington machine would be allowed to continue with business as usual. And that business is the fleecing of the American taxpayer. Again, these are comments. If you want to jump in, you can jump in, but these are comments, not questions. And Mike says the Republican voter absolutely sees it that way. They feel the party has abandoned them a long time ago. Speaking of the Republican Party, you're shaking your head. Do you have any comment there?
I don't think that the Republican Party was ever with you, right? I mean, I think this is again the horror of it all, right? Is that if you go back to the Tea Party, okay, and the rejection of the socialist movement inside of our healthcare system that kind of birthed the Tea Party movement, we saw it was John McCain and John McCain's Republican staff that encouraged the IRS under Lois Lerner to go after the Tea Party movement. We saw ever increasing Republican majorities culminating in the election of Trump out of frustration with those Republican majorities. And then when we gave them the Senate, the House, the court, and the White House, they still did nothing. So it's an understanding that the Republican Party exists to act as a gas pressure release valve for the Americans trying to defend America in America. And so now the MAGA movement finds itself kind of without home. And it's going to be a very interesting next year or so as John and I are doing our part to shape what we can with the movement that we're part of. But I don't think, we don't offer it up as the solution to everything. We're just trying to make sure we influence people's conscience and that they go with their eyes open into this fight.
Thank you. A couple more questions before we sign off for today. Daryl says, if the claim is going to be promoted that software flipped the election, it must be proven in court and not the court of popular opinion. Until then, the claim shouldn't be stated as truth or fact.
Well, I have to disagree with that because that's exactly what happens in communism. When they force you to remain silent and you don't bring up the subject, you don't even bring it up for discussion. And if it wasn't set up for corruption and fraud, why do these voting machines have modems in them? It's illegal to connect a voting machine to the internet. These things have motives, and they were connected to the internet, and those votes were sent to foreign entities to do the calculation. So there's just no doubt in anybody's mind that there was fraud that have really looked at this, because when they shut down, remember when they shut down the vote count around midnight, was it, Rich? They shut down, and all of a sudden Biden gets 135,000 votes within minutes in Pennsylvania. Physically impossible. And the same thing in Wisconsin, the same thing in Michigan, the same thing in Georgia. Rich likes to put it, when he put the GOP capital letters and a small e. That's the GOP establishment. There are two parties in the United States, the establishment and not establishment. And unfortunately, there are no politicians that fit in the non-establishment group, or if there are, there's so few that they make very little difference. So you have to start. The only way you expose a lie is to start saying the truth, and that's what we have. That's what we failed to do, and that's why it's gotten as far as it has right now. Rich, what do you think?
Well, I'm gonna go right at the heart of the matter on this. In the intelligence community, normally what we do when we're assessing a situation, we look at three things: the history, the capability, and the intent. Okay, and I think historically what we've seen through the Smartmatic Corporation, okay, which is, this is documented historical fact as expressed by one of the most concerned senators about this company, is Elizabeth Warren. All right, there you go. A real hard-hitting conservative there. Okay, and so what we see is, in the past, in Venezuela, in the Philippines, in countries in Africa, this system has been used to control voting outcomes. Now, am I making the specific allegation that in 2020 that's what happened? Nope, I'm not making that specific allegation. What I'm making the allegation is that the history, capability, and intent are there, and that we know now that these companies were put in place by a hostile intelligence service under Maduro, that they were underwritten and financed by the Chinese communists, and that they merit a full scope investigation as under 18 USC 951, agents of a foreign power. And in the past, what Attorney General Barr has said is, we can't seize the machines, we don't have cause. Well, now we know we do. And the machines should be seized and they should be investigated. Now, that doesn't mean they're the only type of fraud that took place. As John alluded to, there was good old ballot stuffing. There were, let's take the psych patients all to vote. We have, the level of fraud is just actually mind-blowing. And it's really sad, like I said, that Americans would do this to their fellow Americans here in America. As a matter of fact, it's a disgrace. And we need to accept the fact that that's just the way things are here today.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more question and then we'll have to wrap it up for today. Very sobering and very enlightening conversation that we've had today. The question is from Jason O'Neill. Hi, Jason. He says, Rich, where do Christians go from here? How can we as Christians, take back our culture and instill a moral government? Christians feel like their backs are against the wall, with all spheres of influence taken over by secular humanist Marxists. So the question is, how can we as Christians take back our culture and instill a moral government?
Okay, I'm gonna answer that for all the men listening today. Make the commitment to yourself and to God today. Don't wear a mask again. Period. Start there. Okay, and from there continue to grow. Right. The problem we have is so many Christians today have this image of Jesus with lipstick. Do you think Jesus would wear a mask? Do you? He'd laugh at you for no way. All right. He'd see for what it was, and then he would act accordingly. And I think, we have to accept the fact that society around us can be completely hostile. As a matter of fact, they'll hate you because they hated me, I think he said, right? So I think we need to understand that as individuals, we're called to stand in that. And the hardest thing, I think, for so many of us is we've had it good here in the United States for a long time, right? And I laugh because I see people online, oh, there's going to be a civil war, there's going to be this, and I just laugh, oh, buy guns and ammo. These people have never been outside of air conditioning, right? You think you're going to have a war, okay? So as insurgents in our own homeland, it's very important that we fight for our own little kingdom. It starts in your home with your family, and then your neighborhood and your school. And, don't underestimate all those little steps. It's the million whispers that makes the tsunami. And I think that's how I would frame it. And it's going to require a level of patience that we may not see the outcome in our lifetime.
Thank you, Rich. Obviously, what we're talking about here, even for the countries, is death by 1,000 cuts. And what you're proposing is that we do the same on the opposite side. We begin to take a stand and make those little choices every day to refuse to let go of our freedoms, to refuse to let go of our rights. And every little one of those choices will culminate, if we keep doing that progressively, would eventually, come together to make sure that we continue to stand as a free people. Now, I do have my own question, which is about the Christian church. What John has talked about, what you have talked about, is really leading to only one conclusion: the inevitable persecution of Christians in this nation. It happens in other nations. Christians are regularly, in fact, routinely persecuted, and more Christians have been killed in this century than ever before. And the question is, America has been shielded, from this by the grace of God. And to your point, we are very complacent. We hear about things happening like this, but it happens elsewhere. This is not an American problem, but this chicken is coming home to roost. How can we as Americans prepare for what is unfortunately beginning to stare us in the face: persecution for Christians?
Well, I think a big part of any preparation for conflict, whether it be kinetic violent conflict or nonviolent conflict, is to develop. And this is kind of what John and I are on here to talk about tonight: is to develop your networks, to develop your comms plan, to have redundancy and resilience built into your life, into your family networks, into your neighborhood networks, and to really begin to understand that the factionalism that so often afflicts Christianity really works against us right now, and to speak boldly and to move past the sort of understanding of what I always had called this idea of Jesus with lipstick, the feminized version of Christ. Okay. Christ is a warrior. It's the Isaiah 61 Christ. I mean, I draw upon my time in the military, and there's all sorts of subtle Christian references inside of the military that people don't even recognize anymore. I think, last thing is to get a deep appreciation for sort of our own historical struggles, in this country, at the height of the Civil War, at the height of the Revolutionary War. And I think when you draw back and you just step back and you kind of look at this isn't a new fight, right? I mean, we've been fighting for freedom since the day one. And then I think when you go back and you look at somebody more recent, like Reagan, for example, said all it takes is one generation, to let this thing slip away. And I don't want that to be our generation. So it's time to step forward.
Thank you, Rich. And again, we're going to cut it off. But one more thing to say is your comment about not wearing a mask is a challenge. It is a challenge. I personally struggle with that because, again, wearing masks have been, whether rightly or wrongly, presented to us as protecting people and helping to stop the spread of the virus. So that's a concern. And I'm looking at my comments here. It seems that many of our audience agrees. People are saying, I don't agree with not wearing a mask. Masks have saved people. It's not just me. There's a lot of concern about you saying that people should not wear a mask, for self-preservation and for the health of other people.
Well, let me tell you, if I can, Gloria, step in on that. Two things. One, what Rich was talking about before, what do we do? My wife, Pat, can tell you, every time I send out a tweet on Twitter, I said to Pat, this is the one that gets me knocked off. And what happened was, as we started talking about religious liberty and freedom and standing up for it, Suddenly, deacons and priests from England were sending. We're on. What do we do? Where do we go? From Poland, from Italy. So when they started building, when they saw that mass building, they were afraid of that, and they cut me off. Here's the point: there are more of us than there are of them. So we have a louder voice if we use it. And the second thing is about the mask. There's this great picture of somebody wearing one of the masks, taking a puff on a cigarette, putting the mask over and blowing smoke, and smoke coming out in all different directions of the mask. The frontline doctors and the epidemiologists that are involved in this, that really want to help stop the spread of COVID, says one thing, that the particles of the COVID virus are, I forget, like a quarter of the size of the particles of the flu virus. And this mask wouldn't stop the flu virus. And if you're in a hospital, you know what they wear? They wear an N95 mask, a plastic shield, and everything. If the mask would stop the virus, they would just wear the mask, but they don't, because it doesn't. And they learned in ancient Islam that the first thing to do to muzzle people, make them compliant, is to make them wear a mask. That's why their women wear a veil. It silences them. That mask will not protect you. Like someone said, wearing a mask to stop the virus is like having a corner of a pool for the pee section if you want to go to the bathroom. That swimsuit's not going to stop the pee from going to the rest of the water. And a mask will not stop the virus. And that's not from me. That's from the frontline doctors who said, in fact, it actually traps. And for people with respiratory problems or other heart problems, that mask constrains their breathing capabilities. And so they're breathing back the carbon dioxide out of their body. So it's look, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than you do about catching the virus outside without wearing a mask. It isn't going to happen. And the reason they do that is because they had to come up with something. There are therapeutics that can help protect you. They protect it in Pat and I. Even though we got the virus, we came out of it perfect. So do your research and listen. And you understand this about the vaccines too. And I'm not trying to be a medical doctor. The vaccines, Bill Gates said 10, 15, 11 years ago, that the best way to reduce the population will be through vaccination. These vaccines that they're coming out with the COVID are very, very dangerous. So do your research.
Thank you, John. Rich, did you want to say anything? And I'm telling you, people are very strongly against this. They said that's not true. The flu virus went down when people started wearing the masks. And Daryl says in Egypt, God told the children of Israel to stay within their homes under the blood until the death angel passed. So I think he's making an analogy between that and the mask. But we can't continue. This is, the scientists and CDC all hold the mask protects against the virus. So there's a lot of people are not supportive of not wearing a mask. Rich, I'll ask you to have the last word on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, my sister managed an intensive care unit at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston for COVID patients. My wife works at the hospital. I don't wear a mask. I never wear a mask. And the reason I don't wear a mask is because I passed 9th grade biology. I was also a biochemical weapons expert when I was in the Army. And you know what they used to tell us about bioweapons? Don't bother putting on your gear, it won't help you. The bottom line on all of this is, if you understand psychological warfare and you understand population control measures and you understand special warfare, very clear what they're doing is they are seeking to have a level of compliance displayed by the population and your willingness to go along with things that are counterfactual. Now, we've seen with Fauci and Birx and others, this willingness to lie to the population about the effectiveness of masks. Remember, you don't need a mask before you do need a mask, right? So if they lie to you about that, they lie to you about other things. And I as a scientist and an engineer by background, I've just got to tell you, what's happening here is anti-science. It is pseudoscience. And the reason that they're doing it is because through pseudoscience, they claim pseudo authority over you. because it's a power that you bestow upon them that they have not deserved. The information you need on all of this stuff, the effectiveness on masks, on viruses, if you're coughing and sneezing and so on and so forth, go ahead, wear a mask, right? Or walk around with a tissue over your face, same effect. But the idea that you're going to stop a virus, an airborne virus, is just not possible. I think, I don't want to get into a big long argument about all that. I think the more important point that I'm trying to make in all of this is stop doing everything that the government tells you to do because they're the government.
I think I can agree with that. Stop everything the government is telling you to do, because that definitely is control, and that is where, and that's where this is ending. The government wants to control people and want you to lose your freedoms and begin to, when the government tells you to jump, the only question you ask is how high. Exactly. And sadly, that's where we're getting as a nation, and that's a very dangerous place to be. And the government is trying so hard to take the place of God in the lives of people. And that's a very dangerous precedent as well. But unfortunately, we don't have unlimited time. Our time, we've actually gone way over what we planned to do for today, but I wanted to keep this conversation going because it's very important and also very, very engaging. And people obviously are very interested and have a lot of questions. Thank you, Rich, for coming on. Folks, tell us your website one more time so that folks know where to get more information.
Thanks, Gloria. It is unconstrainedanalytics.org. And we have a lot of free downloads there. Everything we do is free to the public. So by all means, please check it out.
I'd like to tell everybody, please make a donation there when you go there. And that's from one nonprofit telling about another nonprofit to donate to them. So you know how serious I take this. And one last thing, Rich, if we don't get more people to understand this and we go to jail, I call dibs on the bottom bunk.
Deal.
Well, on that note, and John, again, the organization that you're talking about starting in January, maybe we'll talk about it so our audience can know how to get involved and what to do at that point. Thank you, gentlemen, and what a way to end the Great Talk for the year. This was explosive, but it was necessary, and we'll continue to talk about this because it's of prime importance. Thank you, Rich, for what you're doing. Thank you for being here to talk about this, and thank you, John, and give my regards to Pat.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas. Bye.
Bless you.